let's start. So I think we will narrow today's agenda to the bulk export API, and I would love this hour to discuss. If maybe you have something else to discuss, guys, let's focus on this API. And then let me probably share my screen. Jump to SQL on FHIR. Okay, so this is document. So the Google Docs introduced tabs, so I created special tab for bulk export API. And I have a set of questions we can like discuss one by one, or maybe probably the first question is, should we reuse existing export operation and extend it, or introduce our own? Like what a pro, and especially then. Do you have an opinion on that?
I have a preliminary opinion, which is we'd have a lot more flexibility if we create our own. And I think there's maybe going to be a lot of stuff in bulk export that we don't need, and some stuff that we do need that isn't in it. So I guess I would actually, but that's a tentative opinion. So I guess what I would say is we should go through and design the operation we want, and then we can see if it's very different from bulk export, it definitely has to be its own operation. If there's a lot of overlap, then maybe we can look at trying to, ballot it into bulk export in some, or add a couple parameters or something like that. But I guess my initial view is probably need to be different operations, but I think maybe we revisit that after we've gone through some of your other questions here and see where we are.
Any other guys?
So let's try to keep bulk export in context, which Dan, I'm not super concerned about you, but don't recreate parameters that just have a different name for the same thing.
Agree on that for sure.
Yeah. Another probably like important question, do we want like a bulk operation when we can list multiple views and export at once? Or we want to design initially like atomic operation, like exporting one view, and then try to compose this atomic operation into some kind of like bulk batch operation, like to export multiple views, because this will influence design. We started discussion in comments with John, like should we like support like exporting the same view in different formats? Shall we introduce destination somehow? I don't know, table S3 bucket name or something like this, or it should be implicit. And if we're thinking like that we support multiple view export, then there's like a lot of permutations. So we should say this view export to that in that format and that destination, that view. So my personal opinion, it's better to try to find this atomic operation, like one view, one format, one maybe destination and something else, and then maybe build from this operation some kind of bulk operation. So what do you think, guys?
Yeah, I think my concern would be, I think a lot of bulk traverses many resource types, and I'm worried that a single atomic view won't cover enough of the use case, and that when we try to compose them, we'll get into some weird states that we're not considering about joining and different things like that. I don't know. That would be my worry.
But for now, just to mention that the view can export only one resource type.
Yes. When you do a bulk, though, you typically want to cross those resource types. I don't know. I don't think most bulk exports, I don't think, only hit a single resource type. And so when we talk about those exports, I would worry that if we make it atomic to the view definition, since it is a single resource type, that it would be a much more limited scope.
Yeah, but then we can try to build like bundle with a set of this bulk like view export operation and run like batch. Okay, so let's listen to the other guys. Bashir?
So I think, maybe this is what Gino was actually talking about. So I think it makes sense actually to export several view definitions at the same time. At the same time, exact time, because of the cross references. So although each view definition would be for one resource type, but it's important that, if there is a reference to another resource, then for the corresponding view, I get that, patient, for example. You see what I mean? And also, I suppose we need to define something like since in the bulk export. And then there also maybe the timing matters that, we do it at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point, but it's still like, I don't see how it's contradict, because we can design kind of like transactional bundle, which will guarantee that all the views are exported like in the same.
Oh, I see what you mean. So you mean having multiple transactions in one bundle, basically, right?
Yeah. And we
I
probably
see.
can reuse like FHIR bundle, where you
I
can
see, I
put
see.
like custom operation, but we first design one operation and then we
I see.
compose this one operation into like one transactional bundle.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it can guarantee like a transaction, yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
the same thing.
John?
Yeah, I was just going to point out the whole you want the atomic operations as well anyway, regardless. And whether you have like some sort of wrapper around multiple view definitions, I think there might be more than one reason to have that. Like one reason might be so that you can refer to a collection of view definitions, but you might also want to sort of distribute them that way and sort of say these things belong together, you know, for one particular purpose or something, and sort of refer to the canonical of that collection of things rather than just a single thing.
Yep. Thank you. Then?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a strong opinion necessarily on which way we go, whether we do atomic operations or that are then in a bundle, a transaction type of operation in the export, or whether we have kind of the export be a separate operation. I guess one thing I think is maybe further down your list, Nikolai, that I think is worth thinking through is whether we're conceptualizing export differently from running a view runner that does something on the server. So if you have like a database backend on your on whatever is exposing these FHIR operations, like maybe you are creating tables from your data. If you have like an EHR, you're probably not running you're not creating probably exported tables necessarily in a data warehouse. You're probably creating files that are then downloadable. And I guess from an elegance perspective, when I was first looking at kind of the list of roles, I was thinking that those could be merged into one role. But I think there's some nice properties to having those be two different operations, where you have an operation where you're concerned about like where the server is concerned about where the data is going. And then you have an operation where the server is just throwing the data over the wall. And while you could kind of conceptualize those as two flavors of kind of exporting data, to me, they feel like pretty different use cases. And so I think there might be value in having an export that's really like generate static files that are downloaded, that's distinct from create a new table and populate it on the server with maybe incrementally, or start a population and continually maintain this table as new data comes in. Like there's a lot more stuff that you might do on the server that you wouldn't necessarily do in a like download operation. And currently bulk export is really 100% in that download mode. So I wonder if there's some value in having like a flat export operation that's more parallel to that. So saying like, conceptually, whether or not you support running, kind of creating tables on the server or moving data directly into a data warehouse, like this is an operation that gives you a set of static files, either in NDJSON or Parquet or CSV or however, maybe all of those, that you can then do what you want with. And if we have that type of operation, I guess I don't know that I see a lot of value in having kind of single resource exports there. I think there's probably more value in saying, here's a list of view definitions I want to export, and then give me files for all of them as one transaction. So I guess, I don't know, I'd be really curious what other folks think about kind of lumping those versus splitting them. I guess conceptually, I like kind of the simplicity of splitting out those two different use cases, particularly since a lot of servers will only support one or the other rather than both, or could conceptually support one or the other rather than both.
But potentially that could be like in ideal world, we can parameterize that way. So you may say that there's like destination or format table, and there is a like format, let's say Parquet file, and server may say, okay, I only supporting like Parquet export. Yes, I do not support table, but if you do support both, so you can still use the same operation, but with the parameterized one.
Yeah, totally. I think it's, I guess there's going to be a lot of parameters that might be distinct between those two operations. Like I could see a lot, like you might want very different controls for how you want to create tables. Like what do you do if the table already exists? Are you creating a table that's then going to be updated in the background versus doing an operation to populate a table? Are you clearing a table first? And those are very distinct from like format questions, which you would want in a bulk export around like, do I want Parquet or NDJSON? And so I think you could certainly do one operation and have like a parameter that says table or versus like file or however we do it. But if there are going to be a lot of other parameters that are only apply to one or the other, it might be clean. And if folks are not necessarily implementing both, it might be cleaner to have two operations. But I mean, obviously trade-offs there, right? So I don't know that I'm not saying that's the only way we could go. I guess my kind of initial thought is that there's some value in maybe splitting them out.
Yeah, that's important, like first impression. Okay, so John?
Yeah, I think there might be kind of different use cases here as well. You know, like there might be a more sort of interactive exploratory mode of operation where you're sort of, you know, iteratively looking at the feasibility of certain things and then extracting things like as a human. And there might be sort of more established system to system batch things that just run every night, all that sort of thing. And maybe they're using a group of view definitions that was shipped with a well-known and agreed IG or whatever. So I like the idea of being able to kind of pass ephemeral view definitions to a server and have them execute and give me extracts interactively, as well as sort of referring to some well-known and agreed set of view definitions to sort of get a full sort of consistent export. So I think there's maybe multiple use cases there.
Yep. Yeah. So I have these questions like in a set of questions. So because potentially I understand what Dennis is talking about, and this is raise another question: how extensible our operation should be. Because what I envision that for different implementation there could be very different parameters, and we may agree on some of them, but like if you're doing like, let's say, I don't know, materialized Postgres view or something like this, so you need some bunch of extra parameters, yes? And we probably may like say that you can extend parameters that way and add extra parameters. But it's still, again, the trade-off having one generic operation, which is parameterized, having atomic operation, and making composition. I think this is like a top-level solution we have to make. And then potentially, yeah, we can try to unify completely. And like, for example, I have a question. Can we respond not by file, not by creating table, but streaming the result? Yes, like we had like debug operation in a view definition runner, which may just stream some sample result and which may be useful for debug. As well, this operation may accept the body of the view definition dynamically. So, and we can try to put everything in one operation, but parameterize it, or we can like end up with a set of operations, and that's like decision we have to make. So I have like few another ideas which may like push in one or other direction, because so we have a problem with the logical model in capability statement, and the easiest solution just to declare custom operation. Yes, we always can add the custom operation to the capability statement, and that way we kind of can simulate even search, even discovery. So we may say like, okay, so the dollar view definition is our search, and like view definition export is our export operation, without like waiting like R6 to introduce view definition or like logical models in okay, sorry, I go too far as well. Yeah, but for me the main yes, and if we will have one operation which operates on top of view definition, like with ID, so it is close to what we discussed for runner API. And my question, so, and maybe like put together exporter API and runner API and say this is the same stuff. I don't know. Was I clear? Do you understand, guys, what I'm talking about? In runner API, we discussed that we may have a like CRUD on view definition, yes, and probably like operation export, but we have a problem like to introduce it into older FHIR versions, yes, even like in the newer, unless we have a view definition resource in R6. But we can do like workaround with a custom operation. And my question, okay, like, is there a difference between export operation, especially if it will have like table destination, table format, and runner like apply operation? Or they the same? And we may end up with a couple of custom operation like introspecting view definition by, let's say, $view definition operation, something like this. And then just one or multiple export operations like this. And then it sounds quite practical. So we will just introduce a couple of operations and say, okay, this is a export API as well. This is a runner API. Yeah, John?
It's probably difficult to say without just sort of seeing it all as like a sort of worked example, and you kind of covered a lot of things there. I think, so with the streaming thing, I think the streaming thing is really valuable. In one way, you can sort of say, well, you can return a URL and URLs can be streams, but I think the tricky part there is like the semantics of how you use the URL. So like, if one URL is a static file, but another URL is like a stream of events or something that's supposed to be merged in to each other, like how do you actually describe what these different sort of modalities mean and how to use them?
And so that question, what this export operation response should be. Yes, if you look at the bulk API, if it's asynchronous, it just return the special header, yes, location. And this is a URL you can go and poll for result. So it may return operation outcome with some extra information how operation happened. And that could be reason to create two operations, one which is streaming and another which is not streaming, but probably there's some space, maybe make extension and introduce another header, like accept and say accept stream of CSV and the server can respond with a stream of CSV. But then we will, if it's responding with a stream, so we could not return operation outcome. Yes, with some positive information, not like timing and other stuff. Yeah, but that's again, so that's trade-off having one parameterized operation with a multiple return time. So maybe split, but this could be a good reason to split. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm just trying to understand the use case for the streaming. I mean, it can be useful. It seems, I mean, this might be a tangent, but it seems related to subscription. So maybe you want to actually have a subscription, but receiving like the output of a specific view. But barring that part, isn't that what is the use case for a streaming? Because if it's
for the streaming, like the main, the main use case is the debugging. So that you can like and integration with some debugging tools like View Runner Builder. So I can send this request, get some portion of data, maybe sample data, yes, and present to the user.
Exactly. So wouldn't that, for that use case, instead of introducing like the concept of a streaming, which can complicate things, can we just have like a count or something like that? Or, just give me like a sample, just give me 5 randomly chosen or something like that. And then it's not a streaming anymore. It's like one operation and you can say it's complete. Because once we introduce a streaming in the mix, it's just a different level of complexity.
Yeah, but so if you look at the like bulk export operation, so there's a two modes. One is asynchronous and another is synchronous, yes? And with the header, you turn on asynchronous stuff, and then it will change the behavior of the operation. It will return your location, you polling this location, and stuff like that. If it's, I don't know, then does synchronous mode define it as well? So can I run export in a synchronous mode? No, so it's out of spec.
Yeah, it's out of spec for bulk export. There's a couple things. So the idea was that you could, so there's like 2 patterns under async in the FHIR spec. One is bulk export, which returns files asynchronously. And that the bulk export operation, which builds on this pattern, only supports async. And then there's also an async that you can apply to any FHIR any FHIR operation, which doesn't return bulk files. It just returns kind of a regular, I think a bundle, if I recall correctly. And that the idea there is to be able to like take long running operations that don't need to return a lot of data and make them async. And then some folks have this idea that they might want kind of to be able to ask for any operation, synchronous or asynchronous, which I don't think anybody's implemented, which is why we did it in the header, so that you could, in theory, take like a regular create operation and run it in asynchronous or synchronous mode. But for like the bulk exports, it always has to be async.
Okay, so it's always. Yeah, John, sorry, your turn.
So I think there's multiple different scenarios here, and I think they've all got value actually. So like there's the kind of the current bulk export scenario where you export a static set of files and you go and download those files. There's another scenario where you get URLs to a set of maybe they're files, maybe they're Postgres URLs, maybe they're whatever it is, but those things can actually change ongoing. But they're a full set of data. So you might go to the patient table, maybe not the patient table, the observation table on your first thing, and then go back another time and it's actually an updated observation table in full. And then the third one is like an actual stream. So like more of an event-based thing or a set of changes. And I think the third, that stream case actually aligns more with subscriptions. So there's an open question there about whether you actually kind of harmonize that with subscriptions, and actually if you want that, you get it as a subscription. And that's more like if I want, you know, I want to do I want to do like give you a set of view definitions and get a Kafka stream back, and I want you to give me new rows as they are generated along the lines of that. So yeah, I don't know, depends on how far we want to go with that. And I'd certainly take Bashir's point that, you know, if we try to make it too broad, then we risk trying to like put too much into the same sort of model. But I definitely think there's real use cases and value for all of those things. It's just a matter of how much we're biting off with this particular thing we're talking about.
And then the main question, okay, so we always can split this operation, but still like keep them unified by parameters. Yes, so if the parameters are the same. So, but we need the principle when we decide that this is going to be the same operation with a different parameter, or when we split it into different operation. For example, for the streaming, looks like different response, maybe like reason why it could be two different operations, because it's too hard to describe the same operation, which is returning different response, like streaming response, like asynchronous response and synchronous. Yes. The question, what the difference between if I'm exporting files or I'm exporting table?
So okay, go ahead, Bashir.
No, please go ahead, and then I go after you.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think there is a lot of difference there. So when you're returning files, your output is gonna, like the response is gonna be very different than when you're creating a table. You'll still want to be asynchronous, but instead of potentially, especially with the new bulk stuff that we've been prototyping in Argonaut, where you could have paged manifests and a bunch of other stuff, there's a fair bit of overhead to efficiently returning potentially large sets of files. And none of that applies to an operation that's generating a table where you just have an operation outcome saying probably done, or, you know, 3,000 rows added or whatever. So I guess that's one distinction, and maybe that applies to streaming as well, where, you know, if the response to the operation is going to be in a different form, maybe it makes sense to have that for clarity in a different operation, especially if the parameters are different as well. So you have different input and different output. It feels like, even though conceptually they're all kind of moving data from FHIR to another format, maybe it makes sense to break those up. And I guess the other thing that occurs to me is we might be able to be fairly tight on bulk export parameters, flat export parameters, where we can say, like, here's the set of parameters. Whereas in the case of tables, potentially you might need to pass in other stuff around what to do if the table already exists, or if there's whether to clear existing tables, drop a table and recreate it, whether to incrementally add, maybe some connection information if you're hitting an external database rather than one that's in the EHR. So like a connection profile. Like, I could see there being a lot of parameters there that vary based on use case. Whereas in bulk, we might be able to, or in a file export, we might be able to more tightly constrain it, which would be helpful if we want, if we want to make it broad, if we want to get it broadly implemented. So we say, here's how you export files, whether or not you can do any of the complexity of tables or streaming, like here's a narrow set of parameters. that support that use case, and here's the output for that use case. So I don't know, I guess if we're looking for heuristics, one might be if the inputs, if the outputs are different between what you would expect from the operation, then it should be split into different operations. If there's overlap, then maybe we combine.
Yeah, that's a good point, and the rule, so we can use Bashir.
So maybe first a clarification question, Dan, for what you're suggesting. When you say table, are you talking about like an external, like a database table, or are you thinking about something that the EHR system, like the FHIR server, internally maintains?
It's kind of abstraction, yes. So it could be like view or table, and I think some runners, because eventually, like some view definitions still end up in a kind of table, yeah, in columnar storage or somewhere. Like having this ability to say export it into the table, maybe even providing table name for specific view definition and some extra parameters could be like a good abstraction. So in our case, yes, sure, we can create like unlogged table or materialized view in Postgres, but I think even if you like doing pipeline and you want to export into, I don't know, Snowflake table or something like this, you may still like use this operation and say, and give the user operation which will say export this view definition to that table.
Yeah, I think well, the one thing I agree, but I think the one thing I would add to that is like if you're thinking of like a traditional EHR that has kind of a legacy backend, they're probably not creating stuff inside their schema in response to a view definition operation. And so I guess there I would kind of expect them only to support like a file-based export, whereas like a middleware view runner could do what Nikolai is suggesting and kind of mediate between an external Snowflake database and the EHR as it pulls the data. So you would create you would implement an operation there and then be able to give it some direction about what to do in Snowflake with the data. And then the third use case is like Health Samurai system, where it's kind of both an EHR data store and a database. And there potentially like the system could do everything internally. So I could kind of see those three use cases playing out, but I guess I would be pretty shocked if like legacy EHR systems, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying that on the recording.
Yeah, but there's a tricky case we discussed that legacy HR may expose like existing tables as view definitions, like,
yeah,
and that will work for the legacy HR as well. So they may say, okay, I do have a like observation flat table, but this is original like table which is used in the HR, and they can like set up it like export into some columnar storage and provide access to the user. So the user may say, okay, I want to like export into the table, and they will just export what they have instead of like applying the real view. So, and this is a layer abstraction potentially, which is good, I think.
But there again, I would say like that's like a flat file export from existing view definitions rather than like creating a table on the server.
Yeah.
So
sorry, Bashir.
Yeah. So what I was thinking, I mean, is that, so I guess there are maybe two problems that maybe it's a good idea to separate. I'm not sure. So one is that like a system integration that, I have a downstream, like a data warehouse or a database or something that I want to keep in sync with my FHIR store. And then the other one is just like the export. Like, I mean, just give me the data. And I thought that, maybe it's better to separate the export problem and then always just give files. And obviously, I mean, the files are URLs. So it doesn't like the bulk export. So you just give a URL, and whether, internally it's being stored as a file or is on a database or something, it's in implementation detail. But it's always just returning like, I don't know, an ND-JSON or something like that. And then we just say what the format is supported there. And then for the system integration problem, again, I am thinking that maybe this is actually the domain of the subscription, meaning that you would, if someone wants to, integrate and then keep their table, like flat table, up to date, it's their responsibility, not the FHIR server responsibility. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but from other side, so this is a kind of layer of abstraction. So you have a FHIR system like FHIR storage or I don't know, warehouse or something else, and you may like say the command, please give me this like blood pressure at this table, yes, and make this magic for me.
Yeah, but then doesn't that mean that we are adding extra dimension of, let's say, how you need to integrate with different database systems, or are you mostly just talking internally? Because if you're talking internally, then I think then we need other APIs to be able to query that flat data.
Yeah, that's good, because I'm keeping in mind that in future, if we will introduce query resource, and the query will operate on tables, and if and like on the top level, I may say, hey system, here is a view definition, export to the tables, run these queries and provide me result. And I'm not like, I'm more declarative, so I'm not saying you should export into this S3 bucket, then like import this S3 bucket into some table, like doing some stuff, and after that running queries. Yes. But yeah, maybe the easiest way to start with the files. But for our system, again, so we can provide like more high level abstraction, and probably your pipelines and puzzling can do the same for the end users. So and that was my question to Dan. So for now, looks like where stuff is exported and how it's exported. So I could not say, and this like provide like prefix for the bucket, please export here, or something like this. So this is like done internally by the server, and user doesn't have control over it. Yeah, in current bulk API. Was it problem or not?
So yeah, we had a lot of discussions around kind of whether to support kind of exporting directly to buckets and how to manage that. And I think we kind of, because we had like a lot of different types of systems involved in bulk, so data warehouses and EHRs and cloud vendors and all sorts of different folks, we kind of opted for the common denominator, which is like, provide me a set of files. Every client can access files at a URL with or without auth, and every server can provide that. And so we kind of opted for that as the common denominator. And man, it's been hard getting everybody on the page to be able to do that in a consistent way. I think there's some vendors have like created a way to say, if you like, we're a cloud vendor, we have a FHIR server, we also have cloud buckets on our server. If you're using our cloud buckets, here's how you can specify that you want the server to just dump the files there. But nobody's
extra parameters in the operation.
Yeah, extra parameters. Yeah. But nobody's kind of defined a cross-system way to do that yet, even for proprietary solutions. It's really all like, if you own the whole, both pieces, then you add a custom parameter so that people have this extra option. But the spec piece is the common denominator of like, they still support the ability for a client to like download the files and upload them to a cloud bucket somewhere else.
Isn't that like a special case of the URL-based approach that you have? Because I mean, the URLs could be like a S3 bucket or a GCP bucket or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It could even be like the server running and serving from database, yes, which may pretend to be like a bucket, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one comment on the streaming or on the pipeline piece. So like, I like the idea of kind of having a layer of abstraction that we publish as a spec that's like, put the files in a table, and then the pipeline on the back does whatever is necessary for that to happen. I think, and potentially there are some custom parameters that the pipeline exposes for things like, different table behaviors or things like that. To me, though, for that to have value as a spec, it might be good to also define some of the streaming primitives. So like, if I want to be able to plug my server into that pipeline, what sort of change notifications do I have to provide, maybe by a subscription or something else, for those tables in a standard way? And I guess this is an area I'm not that familiar with. I know there's a lot of different specs that talk about kind of streaming updates between databases. But if we picked one or defined a FHIR subscription type of approach, where a system can say, here are the changes that are relevant for the view definitions that you've subscribed to, then even if the pipeline is then aggregating those and then doing database inserts or doing comparisons between what's in a table to make sure, like at least you'd have some kind of pluggability between the servers. If you leave all that to the pipeline, then you don't really have pluggable pieces, right? Like you have an end-to-end between one server and one end, and one destination. Unless I'm misunderstanding kind of what you were saying, Nikolai.
No. So are we just exploring this? So I see there's a multiple dimensions in this problem. Yes, and John and you touched another problem like that. Most of users want real-time or at least like incrementally updated views. So so not only doing one export, but like doing incremental export, or eventually even say keep it up to date. Yes, and here we're coming to some API like subscriptions, and probably this is a question for Gina. Can we like say that here is a view definition, create me subscription from this view definition, so I'm getting all the changes by subscription of this view definition, because internally it could be like adapter on real subscription, which will translate and like push it into webhooks, which I don't like, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you can do it in a couple of different ways, because we can define a topic that has an event that says the view definition changed to say it definitionally changed, or we can say it has something that the contents have changed, or we could say, I want a daily one on this view definition, or, all of those are things we can express in subscriptions.
But like formally we can like fit into subscription, or we have some contradiction because the view definition is not resource, the payload is not like standard FHIR stuff. It could be like,
we tried to take all that to account. If there's something we can't do, then we can submit a change request, because we talk about things like shift change at a facility that are completely not FHIR, things that don't have resources, whether we point to URLs or pass parameters back so that we just have key value pairs. All that stuff was taken into account there. So it all should be possible. And if we run into something that's not, I can file the change request.
Yeah, but these scenarios are much more complicated, to be honest. Yes, so and because where are you streaming this stuff, how are you handling it? It's still a lot of questions. That they are not files already. Yes, so in case like bulk export into files, so we can like abstract to URL. But if we're talking about streaming and subscriptions, so things getting much more complicated. John, I know you built this prototype, so
yeah, the more I hear of this conversation, the more I think that we should treat these three things separately. The static case, the updating case, and the sort of streaming case. And I think we should start simple, potentially like create an analog of bulk export and go from there. Yeah, like I think there are sort of, as you were alluding to, Nikolai, there's sort of conceptual problems in mapping view definition results straight into FHIR subscriptions. Like we kind of need like some sort of like serialization format / metadata around like a row of a result to do that, or some sort of convention around doing that. So that's like kind of like an advanced end of this. I kind of think we should start with, I can go to a server, I can execute a view definition, and I can get the result back like either inline interactive, and it's like I'm authoring and I'm doing this sort of interactively, or I can just get it out as like NDJSON Parquet files. I do think that the table thing that you've actually built, Nikolai, like into AidBox, I think that's really useful, and I think lots of people want that sort of thing. But is it an export? Like, are the semantics of it an export, or is it something different to export? Maybe it's got a different name to export. And therefore different.
Eventually it will be export. So we discussed that like Postgres, it's still like row-based database, yes. And for some scenarios we need column, and we want to work on a bunch of adapters which will like keep columnar tables up to date. But the user will say the same: just give me this view definition as a table and some parameter, let's say in Snowflake, but the rest will happen behind the scenes, so they don't think how it works. So they just set, and they have a like near real-time columnar table updated. And that I think that even for puzzling and Google pipeline, it's still worth like on the top level to give the user this ability, just say, keep this table up to date. I don't care about details how you're doing this, yes, but just in your presentation when you did the demo, yes, you end up with a table. Yes, so the final destination was table, and we can abstract. But I agree that there's multiple layers. So at the lowest layer, like bulk export into URL files system, then maybe incremental updates with the scenes or something like this. then maybe think on like streaming, because I think like subscription and streaming, it's still it's still worth to chase, because so if I can define topic and say, okay, it could be in Kafka, and we will define what the output format, yeah, like Parquet, bucket, like, or I don't know, or the arrow stream or something else, like not arrow, another this raw format for protobuf, yes, and I can send it to the Kafka, and my server can publish this subscription like topic, and Puzzling can consume it and load, yes, or somebody else. It's still worth to look in this area as well, like in this direction as well, because and the subscription trying to solve this problem, yes, but I agree it's much more complicated than just doing bulk exports into S3 bucket. Yeah, sorry, John. Then.
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to say quickly was I think we should take the same approach that we took to the development of the initial spec, which is like a reference implementation led approach. Like had a little bit of a go at this, like just adding another NPM package to our JavaScript thing, which is basically just a simple API over the top of like ND-JSON files or whatever that starts to implement like some of these operations that you've got in your document. So, I think we should just start simple, pick like, say, like the export thing and create a minimal sort of JavaScript implementation of it, and kind of use that to sort of guide the discussion from here, so that like we can kind of be more focused and tangible.
Yep. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. I love the idea of doing implementation focused development. I think one thing that might have value, the one piece that might be worth doing before we get too far along there, is just talking about the parameters a little bit, so that we have a sense of kind of what the minimum set of parameters we'd want for even a basic operation would be, and what we can borrow from other places in FHIR, like bulk export or other operations where we just use the same parameter names, so that we're not creating new stuff just because we didn't know about things, which is why it's always helpful to do it as a group, because everybody knows some part of FHIR that uses one thing and somebody knows parts that uses something else. But I like that idea a lot. And I like the idea of kind of starting with the file-based stuff, because it's probably the simplest use case. And potentially some of the subscription stuff, we can decide how streaming, what level of granularity we want to do the subscriptions at. I guess one very high level of granularity would be to say, you have changes to this view definition, go do a new bulk export with a since parameter of whatever. And that would give you all the changes to your bulk export since the last time, without having to kind of periodically try to do it yourself. You could have a subscription that tells you, there have been whatever 10 new records added that would meet your subscription, and then you can go do a bulk export, which has the nice property of not having to ship like a lot of rows through some mechanism that's there's complexity, right, in terms of like not doing a file-based thing. So I like streaming in a lot of ways, and I like the idea of actually subscribing to the changes and getting those incrementally. But I think for simplicity, we may also want to consider like subscriptions that are more notification type about changes to a view definition, and then letting you just retrieve it using some kind of simpler protocol. But that's something to think about down the road.
Let's act local but think global. Gina.
Yeah, I know we're almost out of time, but yeah, the hope with subscriptions is that it can be bolted on separately, and that it should be able to fit whatever we need. And if it isn't, then we need to fix that in subscriptions. So I think the same thing of, let's figure out what we're trying to do, make all those pieces work, and then figure out, okay, yes, we want to add notifications, we want to trap these things as individual records or as periodic things or whatever, and be able to plug in on top of it there.
But Gina, what is your impression? Do you think this scenario, like replicating real time or near real time or like incremental view definition, fit the subscription use cases? Maybe.
I think there's two parts. In one set of scenarios, I think it fits very well, that you're just saying, okay, yeah, I want, instead of sending me, here's a bundle, I want you to send me my export from a view definition and base it off these other events that are happening and whatever. In the other thing, it's kind of there's a lot of overlap, especially with the R4 and earlier subscriptions. To say if what I'm trying to do is say, here's my view definition and let me know when it changed, that is kind of the same mechanism that subscriptions is. And overall, implementers pushed back and said they don't want to do it. That was one of the big reasons why it was redesigned, is because people said we can't just let every client come in and start registering on our database and try to be monitoring every single change. We have to materialize all these views and start sending out notifications and all these things. They said, yeah, we just can't scale that realistically. And so in that scenario, then I say, okay, well, there's some overlap and we need to figure out, is it the type of thing like Dan was saying, oh, I just want to know every day, every, week, whatever it is, go and try and run this and tell me how many are different. And then if there's 0 different, don't do anything. If there's more, kick off this other thing. There are a lot of things like that I think have good overlap in a good way.
But I think in our case, we still have the similar dichotomy like you in subscription topics, so that the server may just support like predefined view definition, so end user not allowed to send the new view definition, but may use existing one. Yes. Or the server may expose dynamic behavior, so you can subscribe, like create a new view definition, and then maybe use it. So
exactly. And that's why in that case, having the preset ones is good because you can optimize and you know how many indexes you're going to have and you can set your filters and you're golden. And when you say, yeah, everyone can create their own, then, in your million record system, you might have 5 million different views because everyone has all these different apps and you can't cross between them because everyone has different filters. And so then your database is, 500 times the size that it should be because you have all these materialized views. So there's obviously a trade-off there somewhere, and it's going to be use case dependent.
Okay, Bashir, sorry.
No, just, we were over time. Mostly, but basically what Gino said, I guess maintaining, that's basically our pipelines do, by the way. So maintaining like a view is one of the main functionalities that our pipelines have. I'm just not sure whether pushing this as a kind of into the FHIR spec is a good idea. I don't know.
Okay, so a lot of stuff to discuss. So I will try to summarize. So there's a topic in a Zulip. Please join and let's discuss it in a synchronous way. Yeah, I will publish this bot summary into the topic, and there's a Google document. So yes, if you want editor access, write me, or let's do some comments. So this document should aggregate what we are talking about. But there's a lot of work to do for us. Okay, thank you guys.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. So thanks, you appreciate it. Thanks all.
Thank you.